What kind of God is it that we believe in? If we look at our creed, which I think is kind of, now we don't always we don't read creeds in here, we don't use these creeds, but if you go to the big church, the main church, or if you go to most Methodist churches, you go with the Nicene Creed. We believe in one God, the Father, the Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, all that is seen and unseen. Or we might read from the Apostles' Creed. I believe in God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. You'd have to go almost to the most recent 100 years ago to come to a more modern creed, the Church of Canada, which has a completely different approach, which we're going to get into actually next week. But what I want to suggest to you is that there are primarily two ways that we think about God, and we're going to keep thinking about this for the next 5 or 6 weeks. Because as it turns out, every concept we hold about heaven or hell, about salvation, about who Jesus is, about what it means to live a life of faith, this idea that Paul says in his text, who are these gods that you people, the Romans he's talking to, who are these gods you celebrate? The one God is the God in whom we all move and live and have our being. God is a sacred presence that we are all in the midst of. When we think about God as being removed from us, it's tempting to think of God as a person. And I think we all grew up, or many of us grew up with that idea. And so God has this person-like quality. God has this authority kind of figure, this interventionist kind of approach, and most often thought of as male or as king or as Lord and as real. I'm not trying to say God is unreal. But when we think about God as real, what we've already begun to do is we've already begun to objectify God. God is provable, which is already we're saying God is an object that we're going to believe in, and therefore you don't believe in it if you can't prove it and refuse to believe it because it can't be proved. So atheists, if you'll read any atheist book, most every single atheist writes from that perspective. This is the God I don't believe in. The God that is this supreme being that's out there somewhere intervening like an artist with his art or a clockmaker with her clock. God is out there. Oftentimes, as an atheist will come up to me and say, I don't believe in God, and I'll say, tell me about that God, because I probably don't either. There's a whole other way of thinking of God that I think is more challenging, and that's God as spirit. When we think of God as sacred spirit, as presence, God is not separate from the universe, but God is immanently present in the universe. God is with us. I think Linda talked once when she preached in here, she spoke about God as being wherever we turn, as always inviting, as always being present with us, no matter what directions or choices we make. It is not like God being a super being or something that is separate, but in fact God who is in our midst and inviting us. As Peter Mayer's song, God of the River, you remember his other song, Holy Now? One of our favorite songs in here we've often sung. One of my favorite verses. When we come to recognize that God is present in all things, that we are in the midst of God's presence and God in the midst of our presence, he says, wine from water is not so small, and even greater magic trick is that anything is here at all. So the challenging thing becomes not to look for miracles, because when we finally come to that insight that God is all around us in our midst and we are participating with God, the challenging thing becomes finding where there isn't miracles.